Welcome to the Whole Leader podcast, a space for leaders seeking something deeper than success. I'm Richard Britton. After years of building businesses, I found myself looking for something more meaningful than growth alone. This podcast invites you to explore the work of leading in a complex world, with conversations that delve into the inner and outer work of presence, connection, creativity, and human-centered leadership. Thank you for joining. My guest today is John Purkiss, whose spiritual name is Sri Nithya Banahastananda. His early career followed a recognized path of success and high performance, studying economics at Cambridge and completing an MBA at INSEAD, where he won first prize. He worked in banking, strategy consulting, and then executive search, where he spent years working side by side with top executives and board members. In parallel with his conventional career, he has followed a spiritual path which provides deep insights into what drives decision-making and causes leaders to fail or succeed. John is the author of Brand You and The Power of Letting Go, a bestseller available in 5 languages. His new book, The Power of Moving On, will be published in the US and the UK in January. In this conversation, we explore his career, the ideas behind his books, and the experiences that have informed his thinking, his perspectives, and his work. Welcome, John.
Thank you for having me. Nice to be here.
Did I get your spiritual name pronunciation?
Pretty close. Yes, thank
Excellent.
You. Without rehearsal. Pretty good.
Well, I do my best. Now, I have read the background to that name just before we move on, because that will have certainly created some interest for those listening. Are you able to give a quick insight into the translation of that?
Yes, certainly. So in the Vedic tradition, the guru gives a spiritual name to the disciple to show them their path to enlightenment, because everyone has their own path, right? And that name means eternally blissful form of Shiva, who holds arrows to destroy the ego of oneself and others. So when I was a bit apprehensive, but when I got the name, I thought, well, that fits me perfectly, because my ego needs destroying, and there are plenty of other people who need their egos destroying. So let's get going.
Well, it sounds like a very useful skill to have.
And that's also what the books are about. I mean, ultimately, you need to destroy your ego to do extraordinary things and to become enlightened, because people with ego basically not very good at doing things.
Gets in the way of their success.
Yes.
Well, and that's that's going to be the theme of today, I think. And I'm looking forward to talking to you more about your books and about your insights. Where I'd love to start, if that's okay, John, is by taking you back. You had sort of a remarkable early career, really. First of all, you succeeded in sort of getting into and going through, an academically selective school, and then you studied at Cambridge, and then at INSEAD, where, as I mentioned, you won sort of first prize there. So you were pursuing success in the classic sense. Perhaps you could talk to me about what sparked your drive for all of that to begin with.
Okay, well, the context is, so my guru, whose name is Sri Nityananda Paramashiva, we call him Swamiji, what he says is that even your success is based on, he calls it incompletion, but even your success is based on pain. So if you look at anybody who's been successful at anything, in nearly all cases, it's rooted in pain, right? So in my case, just to give my example. So we moved to Leicester when I was just coming up to 4. And as you can tell, this is my accent is a southern middle class accent, the one that BBC exports around the world, right? So we arrived in Leicester, where the vowels are different and the vocabulary is a bit different. And my first day at school, people laughed at my accent and said I was a bloody nutter. And so that was an obvious initial source of pain. And I discovered pretty early on that the way to get love and appreciation was to work hard and do well in exams. And I wasn't in the football team. I was indoors writing poetry and drawing and doing extra maths.
Okay.
And so, and I started learning French and German and all this. So if you look at my early life, it looks successful and shiny on the outside, but it's rooted in pain. And you can see that in just about every life.
And at that time, before you maybe had those realizations, who would have been your role models that were driving you? Because, of course, that is the setting in which you would have made your decision. If I work hard, I'll get praised.
And it worked. It worked really well until I was 25. Yeah, it worked. And when I meet people, the initial success formula, for some people, it works well into their 50s, right? But at some point, the wheels come off.
Absolutely. You've had insight subsequent when you had been through those experiences, when you'd been through school and Cambridge and INSEAD. Through that stage in your life, I imagine you had role models. Yeah, my role model for a long time was our headmaster, who's extraordinary.
So he, as we say in Hinduism, he left the body a few years ago, but he was unbelievable. He did a PhD in chemistry at Oxford,
right?
And he was a headmaster, and he refused to be promoted. They were trying to promote him into administration, but he just carried on being a headmaster. And this was a selective grammar school, a free grammar school. He could teach a lot of the subjects.
Really?
Yeah, and he encouraged us to learn Russian, so I did Russian for 2 years in the sixth form. He spoke pretty good Russian. And then when we had athletics, so he must have been in his 40s, he used to run the 800 meters with everybody else.
Goodness me.
So for a long time, he was my hero, which is amazing.
And at that time, you were getting a certain view, I suppose, let's use him as your example, of what good leadership was, I suppose.
Yeah, he was a great leader. I remember there was some parents' evening. For some reason, I was there, and he was putting out the chairs and cleaning the floor, but before the Parent Teachers Association meeting. And at some point, someone said, "How are you?" And he said, "What did he say?" He said, "Underworked and overpaid," or something. So he had great humility, with a sense of humor.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was extraordinary.
And that background drove you on, and you achieved an awful lot in the kind of conventional sense there. But as you've alluded to already, at some point during your 20s, I suppose shortly after that education process, life became more difficult for you.
Well, I had this uneasy feeling. So our school, it was a grammar school in Leicester. And at one point, at the peak, about, I think, 18 people went to Oxbridge in 1 year, which was very high for the state sector. But I noticed that there were also suicides amongst the Oxbridge crowd sometime after graduation. I just heard about it.
Is that right?
Yeah. And so I was aware of this. On the one hand, I was, steaming along. It was, the formula was be intelligent and work hard. But there was this thing happening in the background. And then, when I was 26, I won first prize, and was within 3 months, I was diagnosed with clinical depression because I was suicidal. So then it dawned on me, okay, well, presumably this is what happened to the other guys.
Goodness me, poor you. And at any point on that journey, do you perceive, it sounds like some sort of conflict between that academic success and the drive, and some sort of inner feeling that was happening?
I think what happened was, I see it, and this is, in a way, the theme of the new book is, in the new book, I've made the distinction between individual intelligence and what I call cosmic intelligence. So individual intelligence is based on our brains, essentially. So most people who are Western educated, and that includes a whole load of Indians and Chinese people now, most of us have been conditioned to do things using our individual intelligence. So you're born with a brain, if it's a good brain, you then start developing it. And the basis of Western thought, as it's developed, is the underlying assumption is that we are all separate. That's one assumption. And the second assumption is the world is governed by Newtonian physics, which is, 300 years old?
Yes, it is. Yeah. And mechanistic and systems based in a way that, say, quantum mechanics is
exactly.
not. Is the point you're making.
But most people that I meet in business are still operating on the basis that they are separate. What Eckhart Tolle calls a separate body-mind, like I'm a mind in a body, or some people call it a meat suit.
I've never heard that before, but I understand when people talk about, my hand or my foot, as though it's a belonging to something else.
It's a separate entity.
Yeah.
So Swamiji says, the mine, the me and mine comes before the I. So even a small child, at some point, they start saying it's mine.
Yeah.
And then this whole ego develops, right? So most of us have been conditioned that way. And if you look at things like economics, economics is based on the profit maximizing entrepreneur or the utility maximizing individual consumer, or a whole thing. And psychology is based on that. Law is based on the separate person. So most academic disciplines are based on this separation.
And so you were starting to become aware at this point, as you were going through this very difficult stage, that separation, maybe, I'm reading between the lines as to what you're saying. You talked about how the mind inside a body, that mind's been put to work and to good purpose with all of the learning and all of the academics, but at some point the body said, hang on, I'm not.
Well, what actually happened, I only understood with hindsight. So when I was suicidally depressed, which is, by the way, a really common condition, unfortunately, I felt I didn't know anything about the Eastern traditions, because I went to church and Sunday school for 10 years. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't know anything about Buddhism and Hinduism. But I remember the thing about being really ill was I felt completely separate, and people wanted to help, but frankly didn't know how to help. But there was this huge feeling of separation, which I only understood later when I started learning about the Eastern traditions, because they talk about this artificial separation between ourselves and the rest of the cosmos, and its ego, basically.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And there's something you mentioned earlier that you said a lot of very interesting things already. But you talked about how the Western society thinks in a very individualistic way.
Yeah.
I would say there are elements where intuitively we all know that there's more to it than that. And I'm going to give examples that may not relate to you or to me, but if you think of a sport, like a crowd of people watching a game of football together feel a common kind of energy. If you go to a music concert, it's the same. So that kind of connectiveness is there, but that's in a participating kind of form. Whereas that very academic process is actually, it's much more abstracted, and it's very propositional, just in our minds, which is separate.
You're in your mind, and also, it's changed now, but at that time, everything was based on individual examinations, right?
Well, true.
And when I got to business school, then you were starting to be graded on participation or teamwork. But certainly mainstream academia at that time was all individual.
And then if that flows through, as you say, into things like economics and a very fragmented view of how everything works, rather than, more as a whole, more as a system, then I can see how your worldview was quite profoundly changed when some of these things started to be realized.
Well, it just, to answer your question, what happened was I had a little go at management consulting, and I'd had a little go at investment banking, and was clear I didn't want to do either, mainly because I didn't want the lifestyle. And then when I looked at things that I did want to do, so I thought, well, I'm quite interested in fund management, and I'm quite interested in recruitment, executive search. And then I realized, to my horror, both of these things require tremendous intuition. And what I discovered after all this analysis and also learning languages, all this you might call left brain type activity, I realized my intuition had practically died. I was not intuitive. And I thought, I joined Europe's leading fund management firm. It was the biggest independent fund management firm, with some superstars working there. And I realized they were doing pretty basic accounting, but they had fantastic intuition.
Lots of leading today, if you read the blogs or the media on it, is the leaders are encouraged to focus on the data, the analytics, understanding those quantitative answers, which of course are a very important part of progress and a part of everything, but they're not everything and in their own right. And so it's interesting that you point to intuition being central to those areas of work that you were exploring.
Yeah, I think data is really important. Analysis is really important. I would just say it's necessary but not sufficient. And in fact, it wasn't until I got into executive search he's also left the body, but for the first time in my life, when I was 35, I met the chairman of one of the large executive search firms, and he was the first person I met who was highly analytical and highly intuitive. And it's the first time actually I met someone who I wanted to emulate in business.
And the person you've described there was at the top of their game. They were basically the leading firm in the top job, and they had that balance of both.
Well, he did.
he had that balance, and so I suppose that kind of leads us neatly onto what was happening in your career.
Yeah.
How did that feel as you got into that work? Because you were trying to seek out the kind of the true captains of industry in that firm, and you had maybe a slightly different perspective on what you were looking for versus other people. So could you talk to me about that?
Well, the way I got into executive search is I learned mindfulness by accident while reading a novel, right? So suddenly when I was 35, my intuition switched back on, and I realized I can now do executive search. And I let go and asked to be guided. And 6 months later, I was working a failing business in Paris to one of the best firms in London in 6 months. Bang.
By following your intuition.
And also asking to be guided.
Yeah.
So the other side of the new book is cosmic intelligence. The way I would describe cosmic intelligence is running everything, right? And most people don't tune into it. If you do tune into it, so in Sanskrit, it's called Paramashiva, like supreme consciousness. If you do tune into it, magical things happen quite quickly. So in my case, I went from, down and out in Paris to best search firm in London, and working with him was extraordinary. And so he would sometimes ask me a question about a candidate, and I would formulate some answer. His key question, if I was presenting, I used to recruit CFOs all day long, right? If I was talking about a CFO, and he knew the chief executive, and he'd introduce me to the chief executive, for example, or the chairman, and he would say, "Can you see them together?" And I would come up with some rational explanation, and he would just say, "No, can you see them together?" So it's like a purely intuitive question.
Yeah, looking for the chemistry, really, and how it would work beyond their personality type.
I mean, it could be chemistry, but to me, that's the ultimate intuitive question. I mean, this guy had a PhD in astrophysics, right?
Yeah.
So extremely bright, but he would, for me, that is a very intuitive question. You could be chemistry, but it could be, essentially, what is your intuition telling you? Yes or no?
Mm-hmm. And the pair of you were obviously doing something right, because you were placing some important roles in some of the world's biggest firms.
It was extraordinary, because when I was 35, I was working at board level, 35, 36. I was working at board level in the FTSE 100, and that was like my first job in recruitment.
That's a huge responsibility, isn't it? Because these are the businesses that drive the economies that run the world, and you're placing the people making the most influential decisions.
And he also, I was some of these assignments, he didn't really get involved. He didn't meet the candidates, so I was just doing them on my own.
Well, you'd obviously demonstrated your ability through your intuition, through everything else, to make those assessments.
He seemed happy.
Yeah.
One of them, to be fair, got promoted from CFO to CEO of a FTSE 100 company, and I was 37, something like that. So brilliant.
And you'd placed him.
Yeah. Our glorious chairman didn't meet him.
Yeah. Well, maybe you could talk to us about what you learned about the differences between the truly capable leaders that you came across, and maybe the ones that were less capable.
I would say, in fact, the way I got into writing books was the chairman wrote books, and I edited some of them, and he had a really interesting model, which it fits very neatly with neoclassical microeconomics. So we use the same diagrams, but basically,
you need to explain what that is.
Neoclassical microeconomics is the basis of most finance up to behavioral economics and behavioral finance. So basically, let's take this example. Let's take three axes. So one axis is leadership, another one is management, and a third one is entrepreneurship. And he wrote a book about this, and I think it's a very good model. And so if you take those three axes, some people are very good at management. So you would expect someone with an MBA or someone who has been maybe been a management consultant or been, is somewhere working in middle management. There are some very people are very competent at management.
Yes.
And they would be, that would include project managers and HR managers, and they're very good at managing a process and doing all that kind of thing.
So task and process oriented, and
they're very good at that. And so that's one dimension, right? Another dimension would be entrepreneurship, which should be, intuition, risk taking, spotting gaps in the market.
Yeah.
All of that. And obviously there are some people extraordinarily strong at that and terrible at management.
Yes.
And then the third dimension would be leadership, which is much more about having the vision, defining where we're going, keeping people on board, possibly even attracting the right people and scaring off the wrong people.
Right.
But and you can apply this model to business, but obviously you can also apply it to politics or non-profit. I see those as three different dimensions, and very few. It's actually, there are people who are really strong at all three. It's very rare.
And the people that you were looking for those very senior roles, you were looking for that third dimension of leadership
in the corporate sector. So not just UK, but everywhere. I mean, in the corporate sector, you'd be typically looking for someone who's great at leadership. Yes. And then what's really striking about it is that there are lots of very competent people who just aren't good leaders. They're very good managers. And unfortunately, some people get promoted into jobs that they can't do.
Sure, because if they're operating in a FTSE 100 leadership role, there's an expectation that there's a necessity that they'll operate in a certain way. And through your own experiences from how you'd evolved in your approach to life and your perspective over that time, how did that broader perspective that you bring influence your headhunting?
Well, hugely. So as I mentioned, I learned mindfulness while reading a novel, not knowing what it was. I basically learned to bring my attention to my breath and to my senses, and then be present.
And this was through reading, through a novel, through a story, as opposed to some sort of self-help book or anything.
Well, it was basically a self. I'm not recommending the book, but I'll tell you what it's called. It's called Rich Man's Secret, and it's written by an American guy. And he basically is. So, The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle was published the following year, but he's basically describing mindfulness, but he does it in the form of a novel. So the character in the novel is completely stuck. And then he meets this man who says, well, he keeps saying now knows, return to now. And the very simple exercise is just keep returning to the present moment. Keep bringing your attention to your breath. Keep bringing your attention to your senses. And then you'll find yourself in the present moment. And I just kept doing this thing. And then suddenly I realized my thoughts were dying down, and suddenly my intuition was switching back on. Just by being present. I mean, nowadays, lots of people learn to do this through mindfulness, but there are other techniques. I mean, some people learn it through yoga. Yes.
There's certainly huge demand for, mindfulness and yoga, and people looking for alternatives to the kind of busy, rushed sort of short-term bypasses in life. And hopefully when we get on to talking about your books, we can bring out some more of these themes. And so when you were placing your candidates, and looking for the best of them, that actually what you were looking for were people that could step outside of the concerns and thought processes and anxieties of what might happen into what the situations they were experiencing were, so they could be more mindful about it.
I wouldn't say that. I mean, also, I believe consciousness is evolving and people are changing, right? The whole of humanity is changing, right? But to answer your question, there were two things. One was I learned to be present and observe my own emotions and thoughts. And you can imagine in any organization, there are people who completely lose it from time to time. And especially if you're in a professional partnership, right?
Yes.
And so the first thing was, when people went completely nuts, I would stay completely calm until they'd finished. So you get promoted to partner because you haven't had a fight with anybody, in addition to meeting the numbers, right? So that's the first thing.
Okay.
And second thing was, in terms of actually doing the work, is I would, read someone's CV, look at the annual report, look at the financial performance of the companies they'd run, all of that, right? Thinking like a shareholder.
Mm-hmm.
And then just sit and listen to them. And back to my colleague's question, can you see them together? If I know the chairman or the chief executive, if I've met them, then if I meet the candidate who is a CFO or a chief executive, my intuition will tell me whether they'll fit or not. I just know. And I've spoken to quite a few colleagues about this. It's embarrassing because they may articulate it in a different way, but they know within 2 or 3 minutes if someone's a no, and then they have to make polite conversation.
Right. Because they're very tuned into what their client needs.
They just know this person, my client's going to hate this guy or this isn't going to work. But they know within a very short space of time, right?
and these skills, these sort of superpowers have served you really well, because you then went on to start your own headhunting firm.
Well, history is written by the victors. There are various ways of writing history, right?
Absolutely.
In reality, what happened was I made the numbers. I actually resisted becoming a partner because I couldn't see the point. But they said, no, you have to become a partner. So I became a partner. And a year later, there was this massive downturn and they fired half of us.
Oh, dear.
At least. I mean, loads of partners got fired. And so I sat at home diligently completing one of my assignments because I wanted to get it finished. And, by the way, they fired me just after clients started coming to me saying, can you recruit a chief executive for us, right?
So your reputation had started to get out there.
Well, what happens in executive search is you start off, doing your own research and then you start doing searches for other people.
Yeah.
And at some point, you have a reputation, clients come to you. So they fired me just at the point where clients had started coming to me. So I was sitting at home and then I get this phone call saying, oh, I'm being promoted. Can you please recruit a CFO for us? And this was quite a big mid-cap company. And it was the perfect assignment. So to answer your question, the business started itself. I didn't even write a business plan.
So if I take another perspective on this, from trying to interpret something you said earlier, where you kind of sat back and allowed the opportunities to present themselves, is this another example?
Well, the way I would see it now, with hindsight, is if you tune into what I would call the cosmic intelligence, amazing things will happen. And it happens when you stop analyzing and agonizing.
Yeah. I had an old sports coach who once said something like, if you can't do it easily, then don't do it at all. And it was the intent behind it was, even in a game, if you can kind of switch off and let things happen, which, to be slightly challenging, people would accept that far more if you're watching a great tennis player on a court and you think, they're really in the zone doing it. Yeah. But if you start talking to someone about cosmic consciousness, they'll say, well, I'm a bit cynical about that.
No, I understand that. I mean, I just used that word because I was looking for a way to express this thing. So, for example, if we look out the window, right, birds are flying, trees are growing, miraculously, most people aren't concentrating while they're driving cars. Amazingly, most of them don't crash into each other, right? Our bodies heal.
Yeah.
So the way I see it is something's doing all of this.
Yes. But it evidentially is.
Yeah.
But it's not something that's easy to calculate, and it's very cultural, as you say, Western culture. And I'm no expert on this field, but you can go back to sort of Descartes and Cartesian thinking and philosophy, which is, I think therefore I am, and everything has its rational structure, and then the things you just said don't fit into that. So that's possibly why we have a blind spot.
Well, I mean, I'm no expert on it, but as I understand it, what happened in around the 17th century was that there was this split between science and religion happened. I mean, obviously, I did my MBA in France, and I've lived in France for 4 or 5 years. So they call it l'esprit cartésien, the Descartes view of the world is.
Yes.
Yeah, it kind of split in the 17th century. And then we had religion is separate from science, right? And then what happened a bit later on is all kinds of things happened, including the Holocaust. And then lots of people became atheists. Yes. Well, and also communism. So the Holocaust, communism, et cetera, et cetera. So then we're really stuffed because we think we're separate. There's no God. and we have to figure out everything for ourselves. And we don't believe in anything.
Yes. It's sort of, you get into Nietzsche and nihilism at that point.
Yeah, no wonder so many people are depressed.
Yeah, yeah. And when you put it like that, you can start to see how in a modern society where there's, however you might want to dream up what meaning is, there's lots of things that are that don't hold a lot of meaning beyond the kind of instant moment of the gratification of something on social media or going to the shops and buying something.
Yeah.
And then people get a bit lost.
Yeah, well, I've experienced it. Yeah, I mean, when I was 23, I was living with my girlfriend. We had a flat in South Kensington. I had a job in a bank. My mum said, "You're being paid more than your headmaster," who I really admired, and just thought, "Is this it?" What?
Because you've been told this story from the beginning, which is, if you go to school and get your exams and do these things, then you'll progress. And actually, you're saying that when you progress to being a founder and doing things for these FTSE 100 companies, that was less because you were kind of choosing that exact project plan that you were going to implement, and more because circumstances arose for that to happen.
Yeah. So the transition, I mean, there are other words for cosmic consciousness. One is supreme consciousness. But for example, anybody who, excuse me, so you and I both meditate, right? So
that's right.
Anybody who experiences silent meditation, so in, transcendental meditation, possibly Zen, possibly mindfulness, if you do it really deeply, is you experience, and I would imagine a lot of people listening to this have experienced being conscious with no thoughts, right? So, and you might have had that standing on top of a mountain or scuba diving or something. But
I think I do meditate, you're right. And the sorts of experience you describe, I can relate to. I could also relate to that before I was doing meditation, as you say, a beautiful sunset or, a walk in the woods or something like that, where everything just calms down.
Yeah. So there is this consciousness. And what has happened in the West is a lot of people have learned mindfulness or transcendental meditation, whatever, and they experience this, what we call pure consciousness. But the key thing for me is they assume it's passive, right? And it's not passive. It's the source of everything, right? So this consciousness is running everything. And then we intervene with our little brains and think that we're in charge.
And then maybe, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but coming back to the earlier part of the story where you were talking about a gradual, I suppose, split between the hard work that you were doing in your academic sense and how you felt about that and how that left you feeling, was because you were not, you're not leaving yourself open to a more holistic choice around the things that you did.
Yeah, I would say there are two things. One is, and I think it's still happening, is I could see that in business, there were very intelligent people working in what I thought was a highly unintelligent way, like working very long hours in a very mechanistic way. And even when I was in my early 20s, I could see, well, certainly when I got into executive search, I could see a lot of these guys who are dying around 60 in a country where the life expectancy is 80.
Yes.
And lots of divorce, lots of cancer, lots of heart attacks, and all kinds of medical problems. So, from my 20s onwards, I could see, look, something's not working here. Very clever people working in a not very clever way. There must be a better way than this, right? And then that's when I really started looking for it. And then I found it, right?
So that's a nice, neat point, I think, for us to talk about the work you've been doing with your writing. So you've got a different perspective from the one that you'd had before and that many people have around, a good life and what leadership looks like. And then the first book that I'd like to talk about is Brand You, because it seems to me that that's really talking about capturing authenticity, which is where all parts of you come together and you're authentic.
Yeah.
Could we talk about that?
Yeah, definitely.
What sort of brought you to write that book in the first place?
So just to fill in the gap, the first book was called How to Be Headhunted. And that was because I kept meeting people who wanted to be headhunted, who didn't understand how headhunting worked. Right. So I basically, in 10 days, wrote down, this is how it works. This is how you get a job through a headhunter.
Yeah.
But then I realized most people are not headhunted. Most people get a job through networking or they meet somebody or they start their own business or whatever. So a relatively small number of people are headhunted. And so I met David Royston Lee, who's a business psychologist, and we wrote this book together. And he really opened my eyes to some very useful things, one of which was the archetypes, which were developed by, they're much older than Jung, but Jung really developed them. And he was talking about authenticity and purpose and values and talents and all this. And we did, of course, develop a 3-dimensional model.
Yes. That's how people want to consume this.
Well, with my economics and MBA background, I said to him, well, David, all this talking and listening is great, but people want a 3-dimensional model. So we developed one. And the authenticity part, and by the way, he's now produced another edition, but what it boils down to is, okay, what are my talents? What comes to me naturally? What are my values? What do I think is important? And then what's my purpose? What's my mission? And the really good thing about the archetypes, and these days there are 12 used in personal branding, how those archetypes will express what you're doing. And in business, they are super useful.
Is it going to be helpful for our listeners maybe to give maybe just 1 or 2 examples of those archetypes if they're not familiar with
definitely. So there are 12 archetypes. Let's take in the corporate world, let's take Nike. So Nike is just do it. It evokes the hero. So when you look at their advertising, they're talking about heroic achievements by athletes.
Yes.
It's clearly the hero archetype.
Yeah.
Right. If you talk about, so that's a corporate example. If you talk about, and then if, innocent smoothies evoke the innocent archetype, it's about purity, right?
Yes.
So, but then if you apply that to executives, right, whether they know it or not, executives and non-executives evoke archetypes. And the way I say it is, we have like one primary archetype, but then we evoke some but not others.
And you, I suppose, had personal insight into what your archetype might be through your experiences through your 20s. There are many people that would get, let's say, far further in their career without really knowing where what they value or what their archetype might be.
Yeah, most people don't understand archetypes, but it's a very useful vocabulary.
Yeah. And
what I started doing was writing on our database. I started writing down people's archetypes because it was such a useful shorthand.
Really? So you started to you'd meet a candidate and then
make
put hero
notes
next to them or something like that.
And then, I didn't talk to clients in that way because they'd think, you'd be smoking something. But if you take an example, let's take, actually, there was a book written before. So we wrote the book to apply this to the corporate world, but just to make it easy for listeners to understand, there was a previous book called The Hero and the Outlaw, which was written by 2 ladies in advertising. And they used examples from Hollywood and from the corporate world. So if you take Hollywood, Jack Nicholson always evokes the outlaw. Right?
Yes.
Right. So, and if you take, I would say, what's his name? Mr. O'Leary, who runs Ryanair. He evokes the outlaw, right?
That's right.
But so you know what you're going to get, right?
Yes.
And actually, we once ran a presentation in New York, David and I, and in Britain, apparently, we talk about someone is Marmite. He's a Marmite kind of personality.
Yes.
In Australia, it's Vegemite. But Donald Trump, right? A lot of people hate him, but tens of millions of people love him.
Yes, and they know what he stands for.
They know exactly what he stands for.
Hate him. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you, back to the topic of leadership, a lot of people on LinkedIn, you can't tell what they stand for. Whereas I would say the top leaders, it's very clear what they stand for.
You've used a couple of social media references there. How important do you think that personal branding is in a very noisy, busy sort of society and working world?
I think it's super important because I use LinkedIn, by the way. My biggest following is on LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn, but I think most people play it really safe, and you don't know what they stand for. They just I just call it LinkedIn man or LinkedIn woman. You look at the profile and it says all kind of worthy things, but you have no idea what they stand for or where they're going, or
and
it's just generic.
In your kind of executive search situation, that's not really going to help, is it?
It doesn't help me spot a great leader, no. And so one of the things I learned, actually I learned it from the chairman that I was working with, is I thought at the time, why is he so successful when lots of people hate him? And then I realized that's kind of why he's successful, because if you just carry on playing it safe, no one will hate you and no one will love you, right?
Right.
If you put your head above the parapet and stand for something, some people will love you and some people will hate you. And you will build a following, right?
At least people will know where they stand.
They know where they stand. And it's a bit like, Seal It Bang, right?
I remember it.
Yeah. Seal It Bang, the cleaning product, you know what it's for.
Yeah, absolutely.
Bang, and the dirt is gone.
That's it.
It's not, well, it's kind of quite good and I can't really say what it does. And,
Yeah, they
don't want to offend
went
anybody.
from nothing to having a huge brand by being kind of very in your face and saying, this is what our product is.
And, who is Barry and why does he shout all the time?
Yeah. I'd like to move on now and talk about your best-selling book, The Power of Letting Go. Perhaps you could tell us about how that book came about, because you've told me off air a little bit about that before. And its circumstances were interesting as much as its success.
Yeah. So what happened was I came back from France. I was working in the UK and I was working in executive search, and I still felt stuck in some ways. And I realized that a lot of people are stuck. In fact, most people are stuck. So if you look at health, wealth, and relationships, so I was meeting all these super successful people, some of whom were billionaires, but they're all stuck. I mean, in some way, like some of them were on their nth marriage. Some of them kept getting cancer or some illness. So they were stuck in their particular way. And then when I met other people who meditated, some of them were like, blissful relationships and perfectly healthy and no money. So what I realized was just about everybody's stuck in some way.
Yes.
There's something that they're wrestling with.
Yes.
The other thing, rather very sadly, is I realized, one day someone should do a PhD on this. The life expectancy of billionaires of their children is quite low. If you look at what happens to the children of super wealthy people, they have their own set of problems. So I realized, okay, so everybody's stuck in a particular way. So what can we do about this? And I got deeper and deeper into, I'd learned mindfulness, as I mentioned, and then I started going to classes in the UK which were based on the Vedic tradition. So Veda meaning, some listeners may know, the Latin root of the word science means knowledge. The Latin root of the word Veda means knowledge. So the Vedic tradition is closely associated with Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and even Taoism. I would say Taoism is very close to the Vedic tradition.
And it's a knowledge tradition that comes from the Himalayas, is that right?
Yeah, it's possibly 10,000 years old. I would say Hinduism is the modern form. It's become Hinduism. But the assumptions behind it are massively different from the Western tradition. So I would say the Western tradition has become, it wasn't necessarily 2,000 years ago, but what it's become is this whole thing about separation. I'm a separate body mind. If I believe in God, God is separate. So if you look at Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, God is separate.
Yes.
Right. And quite possibly sitting in judgment or not approving of what I do or whatever. Whereas the Vedic tradition is, my guru, Swamiji, first time I met him, he said to us, I'm not here to convince you that I am God. I'm here to convince you that you are God.
So a completely different take on it, and both challenging and very alluring at the same time.
Yeah, and he's constantly saying, you are God in 1,000 different ways. He's telling you you're God. And that's not from an egoic point of view. It's from the point of view of you are manifesting everything all the time.
And we're back to your term about the cosmos, and everything being connected intelligently through that. And you'd obviously gained these insights, and then decided when you came back from France that you wanted to take that and put that into something.
Well, what happened was, so I came back from France. All I knew was how to do mindfulness, and I didn't even know it was called that. And then I started attending these classes and learning more and more. And then I learned transcendental meditation and started to experience pure consciousness twice a day, and thought, and I realized this is amazing. Well, one thing happened was, animals would start walking up to me in the street. Like, there was clearly some shift.
There was more of a connection happening.
Well, something was happening. Animals didn't walk up to me before. Now they were walking up to me. And things like, I just call them downloads. It happened this morning. I'm sitting here silently meditating, and suddenly an idea just appears out of nowhere. And so that happened. That was a big jump, as I suddenly realized this pure consciousness is super creative. And I read about it. I mean, if you read, Steve Jobs did Zen meditation and had all these amazing ideas. And as I understand it, he attributed it to meditation. He could just see further than anybody else.
That's right.
And then I went further down that track, and then I felt stuck again. And then I was introduced to my guru, and this was 11 years ago. And I realized he actually had the solution to all this being stuck business. And so I read half of his book, and then I went to India and sat in his ashram for 3 weeks, and then I realized, oh no, this is what I was looking for. And
maybe for our listeners, you can tell us a little more about letting go, and explain the sort of, maybe you then structured that in your book.
So
tell us more about that.
So the main thing, this is a long time ago now, but the what I realized was, in the West, we have this belief that we need to acquire all this knowledge and skills and all of that, right? So from the age of about 5 onwards, let's say we're really intuitive until we're about 5. And from 5 onwards, we start acquiring knowledge and skills and data. And then at some point, many of us realize that that's not enough, right? And somewhere or other, there was some guru in India, I just read it. He said that the spiritual journey is not about acquiring, it's about letting go. It's about letting go of all kinds of stuff. And I realized, as I went on this journey, and by the way, I explored Buddhism, Kabbalah, Sufism, all these traditions. And
you were thorough about it.
Yeah, well, I was seeking, right? And I realized that, okay, there's a lot of knowledge in there, but there's also a process of letting go, and the common denominator in all of these things. The common denominator in this spiritual journey is letting go.
Letting go seems quite counterintuitive, particularly if we're talking about leadership. Where you want visibility and control over the things you're doing. You're saying let go, which for some people their response may be, actually, well, this isn't what I've been taught, and it's not how I'm used to applying things.
But leadership is a fantastic example. So let's take an example of someone who is successfully managing 10 people. And then they get promoted and promoted and promoted, and now they're managing 1,000 people.
Yes.
So let's say when you've got 10 people, you can micromanage, you can check up on everybody, you can do all of these things, and also you can manage using what Swamiji calls fear and greed. Right?
Fear and greed.
He talks about fear and greed. So greed is
Do you think that's a common approach?
Widespread.
Right.
Nearly everybody is motivated, unless they've gone a fair way down the spiritual path. Nearly everybody's motivated by fear and greed. Yeah. So
fear of what?
Well, could be fear of being promoted. Sorry, fear of being fired. Fear of losing their reputation. Fear of not having enough money. Fear of their spouse leaving them if they work too hard. Fear of having a heart attack. Fear of not fulfilling their potential. Fear of taking the wrong turn. Fear of moving job just when the economy collapses.
And I can see certainly on some of those fears, the fear of not achieving your potential, having made the considerable investment, of getting the exam results, doing the studies, going through the junior roles to get to the bigger ones.
Yeah, or fear, and then later on, fear of running out of money in retirement, fear of...
Okay. So
there's loads of fear. And then you've got greed, right? Greed is, I want to get promoted. I want to be famous. I want to be prime minister. I want to be the boss. I want to have lots of money, so I'm going to feel safe.
So are you saying people shouldn't have aspiration?
No, I'm not saying they shouldn't have aspiration. What I'm saying is it's coming from fear and greed in most cases, right?
Okay. So it's about having aspiration and wanting to progress and, make a success but doing it from a different place.
Well, there is a different way of doing it. So I'm just caricaturing what most of us are.
Absolutely. And I'm exploring so that I can kind of get the whole round of view on it.
So most of us are in fear and greed, and you can, I've met a few billionaires or whatever. They also have fear and greed, right? Because imagine you've now got $10 billion in the bank. Your next thing is your family getting kidnapped, right?
Right. So there's a different set of
it's endless.
Right. Yeah.
So that's fear and greed, right? So the alternative is, and back to our person who's worked their way up from managing 10 people to managing 1,000.
Yeah.
Is if you try to lead 1,000 people in the same way that you led 10 people, it's not going to work. Right. Because, your life is going to get worse and worse and worse, right? Because you've got more and more people who you're basically trying to manipulate.
Yeah. So the micromanagement and the telling people how to do their job.
Or telling people how to do their job, or even, let's say, or, some people are leading 100,000 people, right?
Yeah, of course.
So you've got, someone you don't know doing something crazy in the Australian subsidiary.
Yes.
That's going to affect the share price.
Yeah.
There's just so many things, right? So what I'm saying is, if you're trying to function using your individual intelligence and regarding yourself as separate, life is going to get worse and worse and worse.
Well, certainly you're going to get to a point where there's an explosion of combinations of things that you would need to be on top of.
Yeah.
And being on top of that much is not possible.
Well, I've written about it in the new book. You imagine if you persist with the individual intelligence approach, treating yourself as a body mind and saying, I'm running this company, right? Think of all, you've got to create multiple scenarios in multiple jurisdictions.
Yes.
Weigh up the probability, then work out what you're going to do about it. It's just, you need a supercomputer to handle it.
My experience of working with this example was with some very experienced, sophisticated people from the private equity world.
Yeah.
Clearly they were interested in the numbers, but the primary interest actually was, how do we get this asset, these assets, these companies to function, in a high performing way? And they went straight to culture and values.
Yeah.
And so maybe culture and values is a accepted norm or a modern way of thinking through how do you create something that's more than the individual.
Yeah, I would say that's definitely a step in the right direction. So, for example, some of the most successful companies, there are some companies that are purely focused on shareholder value and lose sight of the customer, right? Obviously, some of the most successful companies are, even very big ones, are highly focused on the customer experience. And I really like that approach. If you're very, very focused on the customer experience and your staff are as well, that really helps.
Yes. It's a reality check, isn't it?
Yeah. Why are we doing it? Like, what problem, when I meet people from a startup, it's like, what problem do you solve? How do you solve it? Who are you solving it for? But, you can apply that to a very big company as well. Because if you carry on doing a fantastic job for your customers, then other things do tend to fall into place.
Yeah, and we're back to talking about, the brand again. We were talking about individual brands and we talked about a few people, but we talked about the companies that have got the right authentic brand for the things they want to do for the consumer.
Yeah.
Nike was your example.
That's one example.
And they know what they want to be for their customer.
Yeah, or Apple. I think none of these companies are perfect, but Apple are extremely good at the customer experience, whether it's using the product or standing in one of their stores.
And they're probably another example of a company that's so big that, back to your sort of your worked example of a person who gets promoted to the point where you've got lots and lots of people, and the combination of things that you could be managing is impossible.
Yeah.
So you're talking about in leadership, accepting that and surrendering to that situation.
Oh, wait, it's beyond that. So what I'm saying is, when these private equity people are talking about cultural values, I do think that's a step in the right direction, right? But you can go a lot further.
Right.
Right. And this may sound, well, probably will sound weird to people listening, but that's why we're here. Where I'll just tell where I've got to, right, personally, and it's been a process.
And before you explain that, the counter to maybe it's a bit weird is this is an international best-selling book we're talking about. So some people are interested.
Some people are interested. But also some of this is, so the new book, which is coming out in January, is called The Power of Moving On. So it's moving on from individual intelligence to cosmic intelligence.
Right.
And the bit that I'm just writing the last 500 words.
Okay.
Is very topical, which is, well, where does artificial intelligence fit into all this? And the way I see it is that artificial intelligence will make us move, right? Because you've got a whole load. So when I graduated, half of the economics students in Cambridge went into accounting. So accounting can be very sophisticated. You know, you can be a tax advisor, you can be in corporate finance, etc. But basically, there are a lot of things in accounting which are being automated by artificial intelligence, right?
Yes.
And if you look at the law or insurance or private equity, actually, there are so many what I would call routine intellectual tasks which are being automated.
Yes.
Right. So what I'm saying is if you wind back a few decades, you could have a good life by being intellectually competent. That's not going to be enough anymore, right? Because AI is going to take it away.
Yeah. Well, and the jobs that people are going to do in 10 years' time are going to need to look very different, aren't they?
Yeah. And so some people are afraid of that, which I understand.
Yeah.
But the reason I mention it is, as I see it, the whole of humanity is going through a transition. It's a bit like the Industrial Revolution. So we had, people used to go down to the river to wash their clothes. Right?
Yes.
Or they used to, plow and make bread and right. And then the Industrial Revolution came along and a lot of those tasks got mechanized.
Yes.
But we're going through the same thing. We have people doing intellectually routine tasks. Those are getting mechanized. So humanity has to move on, right?
I wonder what Descartes would say about this. I think, therefore I am. I mean, you've got the thinking part, not the intuition you talked about earlier, but a lot of the thinking part, which is how do I structure this data to get to the answer from the research I need, can be done by a computer in, a nanosecond.
Exactly. So let's not rely on Descartes. So where we're going, as I say, where we're going is AI will push humanity towards cosmic intelligence, because the individual intelligence won't be rewarded in the same way.
We wouldn't be doing this podcast if I didn't have an affinity with the sort of term you're using, like cosmic intelligence. If we
can use a different term.
Well, I'm wondering for our listeners, what other terms you could use, accessible terms that people might.
Yeah, no, I've only used that term because in the new book we've had to say what are we moving from and to.
Yes,
and most people who read these books are intelligent, but they've been conditioned to believe that their intelligence is individual. So that's why I'm calling it. And by cosmic, I mean the intelligence which is running the cosmos.
Collective intelligence.
No, it's not even collective. It's more than that. Other words for it would be supreme consciousness. So not the individual consciousness, but the consciousness which is in everything. So, for example, actually, the consciousness that makes a rugby team successful is not individual, right?
It is a collective.
It's collective.
People call it a vibe or a team spirit.
I was once. I mean, I rowed very badly in a very lowly boat at Cambridge for one term, but I once ran alongside the Oxford and Cambridge boat race in Barnes, and I was astonished by how fast they go.
Yeah,
and so that's an example of this collective intelligence when 8 people really connect.
Yes. Yeah, on a level that people wouldn't really put into words.
We don't know until you try to run alongside it.
Yeah.
and so but then it goes even beyond that, right?
Yeah.
So you could call it collective intelligence, but it's more than that, because it's not just everybody's connected. It's I would say it's the intelligence or the consciousness which is in everything, and
how things can flow if they're sort of.
Well, in the West, we use words like flow to try to articulate it, and I suppose it's best if you experience it. I mean, for example, if we don't do stupid things, our bodies heal, and they run pretty well for several decades, right?
Yeah.
If the way that plants grow, the way that the climate maintains itself, if we don't do silly things to the climate, there is an underlying intelligence. I mean, I know there've been academic attempts to say it's all random.
I think it's generally accepted now that even if you're taking a systems view, which is a fragmented, separate view, that all of these systems add up to super systems, the kind of Gaia theory and stuff.
Yeah, Gaia theory.
So yes, I think that's helpful to explore topically what cosmic intelligence means a little more, but hopefully we've covered that now for our listeners.
Yeah.
So with all of those kind of interconnected, the power of the interconnected systems that are running, kind of bringing more to this than one individual can, the cosmic intelligence.
There's actually, this is the big shift, right?
Yeah.
There's a big shift beyond that. So one is, stage one, you might say, is I'm on my own.
Mm-hmm.
If it is to be, it's up to me, that kind of thing, right? Mm-hmm. Very individualist. The next stage might be, okay, I've figured out how to work as a team, collectively, but I'm still treating other people as separate.
Yeah.
And probably trying to manipulate them in some way. Maybe some reward, whatever.
Yeah.
The big jump is realizing that you are not this separate body mind. You are this, what you could call it, super consciousness, supreme consciousness, cosmic intelligence. In Sanskrit, it's called Paramashiva. And this is where, Swamiji is saying you are God, is basically you are the intelligence that's running everything. And for most people, this is an enormous leap, but a lot of the top performers in history have already experienced it. So if you think about, I don't know if you've read much about, like big scientific breakthroughs, a lot of them just come out of nowhere. They don't come.
The eureka moment.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So where does that come? And, if you meditate, you and I, we've experienced it. But a lot of the massive breakthroughs, they happen when people are not thinking. And certainly composers, artists, they tap into this intelligence, which is not, to take an absurd
example. It's the creative process, but it's maybe not uniquely their creative process.
It's not their...
It's the creative process.
I
spoke to somebody recently who is building an online movement that develops creativity, and they were talking about co-creating with the universe.
Yeah, exactly. You could call it co-creating. Yeah, definitely. For example, Malcolm Gladwell written all these books, and he wrote this book about, is it 10,000 hours? You need 10,000 hours.
Yeah.
I went and did the sums. It doesn't work for Mozart.
Right.
He wasn't old enough.
Yeah. and these prodigy sports players, the footballers that make the national team when they're 16 years old,
Well, yeah, I don't, maybe they did, but certainly Mozart didn't have enough time to clock up 10,000 hours.
Yeah.
So the co-creating is, I think, very close to it, because you still think you're separate, but you're co-creating with the cosmos. As I understand it, the destination is you are the cosmic intelligence, and hence, you are God. And then you start manifesting extraordinary things. And in a corporate sense, what happens is you start to lead very large numbers of people with very little stress, because it's not you constantly trying to figure everything out. You don't need to.
Putting some trust into what is beyond you as an individual.
Well, beyond your body mind.
Yeah. In a practical way, one of the things I talk with my team about is lots of the opportunities that we're looking for will present themselves if we're present and there to notice them, rather than caught up elsewhere and missed them.
Well, here's a practical example, right? So a lot of people are terrified of letting go, right? Because they're trying to control everything out of fear. And we're afraid if we let go, everything will fall apart. If you let go in the correct way, everything falls into place.
the right things start to happen, and you can see
Things
what's
show up.
needed. Things show up. But even in the practical way that people will understand, if you're less stressed and anxious about the things that might happen, then the things that then you've got more space for realization of good creative ideas, like you talked about when you're meditating. That unexpected email in your inbox, which you wouldn't have had time to look at otherwise, you notice it and realize the relevance in a way that maybe you wouldn't otherwise.
Here's an example, which I'm probably going to put in the book, but I love the example. Compare the market.
Yes.
The insurance, right?
The meerkat one.
Yeah. Do you know how it happened?
No idea.
I read it, and it's a great story. So for those who are not familiar, so Compare the Market is an online business where you can compare different insurance providers and buy your insurance policy. So it's comparing the market. And apparently what happened is one of the creative team in the advertising agency, by the way, insurance is quite hard to market, I think.
Yeah, yes.
So apparently he was cycling through Battersea Park, and he went past the zoo, and there was a sign that said, "Come in and see the meerkats."
Right.
So he, as you say, he was open to what was around him. And apparently what happened is he started experimenting with the word meerkat in different accents.
Mm-hmm.
And then he came up with Compare the Meerkat.
Really?
Right. And this took Compare the Market from not doing very well to a market leader.
Yeah.
And loads of spin-offs and just extraordinary.
Yeah.
But you imagine if that cyclist, if he'd been with his headphones on thinking about his mortgage.
And it's the eureka moment again. It's allowing that kind of creativity and to flow in. And you were talking about that in regard to your book that you're writing at the moment. And maybe you can tell us, are you okay to tell us any more about your book?
Yes, certainly, yeah. Yeah. Well, so the title is The Power of Moving On. And the question is, what are we moving from and to, rather obviously. So what we're moving from is relying on individual intelligence, right? Mm-hmm. Which is with all the hard work and stress involved. And what we're moving to is tapping into the intelligence which is running everything all the time anyway, right?
Sounds exciting.
And a lot of people are very interested in manifesting, right? How do I make things happen? How do I create what I want in my life?
If you spend 10 minutes on YouTube, you'll get a video telling you to learn how to manifest what you want.
Yeah, it's all come back. There was a big boom around 2008. It's all come back. And so most people, everyone's manifesting all the time. They're manifesting all kinds of things they don't want. And they're failing to manifest some things they do want. Mm-hmm. And then when they try and do it through intelligence and hard work, it becomes very stressful. And so where the book takes us to, which is where the way I live now, is some people are scared of this word, is I surrender. What I do is I ask, we use the word Paramashiva, but you can use cosmic. I basically ask that intelligence to manifest through me. And it's extraordinary what happens. And I give examples in the book. Actually, travel is a great way to experience it. I'm sure you've had this experience. You're trying to get from A to B, but you also need to do C, D, and E. Mm-hmm. Right. And it's all terribly complicated, and it involves different time zones, and you can't solve it with your brain. It's not possible, right?
Yeah.
And I've experienced this many times, is I just say, right, Paramashiva, please manifest through me. And I surrender. I just let go. And it all falls into place.
So the things that need to happen begin to happen with less stress.
There's only stress if I start trying to analyze it. Yeah. But basically, I still do things. I still, book tickets. I still look on websites.
You still need to manage.
I do, but I'm following my intuition. Yes. My intuition tells me what to do.
Yes.
Right. Now call Fred. Now do this. Now do that.
Right.
So basically, I'm following the intuition, and it's basically it's spooky the way things fall into place. But what I'm saying is, the point of the podcast is, you can run an organization that way because your intuition will tell you constantly what to do.
And certainly, good leaders, particularly when they've got quite a lot of experience, will say, this was gut instinct, or I'm doing something because it feels like the right thing to do. Or they'll sort of know which of their dashboards to navigate to that day and dip into it without asking the question, why did I have that realization? I need to go and look at that today.
There's one caveat. You have to be careful. There's a thing called false intuition, which comes from pain. So you do have to get rid of the pain from the past, because otherwise your intuition will start telling you to do things which are unhelpful.
Right.
And that's what the power of letting go is mainly about, that is getting rid of the pain.
And releasing those kind of unwanted experiences that you don't want to repeat again.
Yeah, because if you look in politics right now, there are people invading countries based on pain, which is from their childhood.
Mm-hmm.
So if you get rid of that pain, you won't carry out any very painful invasions.
Yeah, we do get to the point of talking very much about geopolitics from the point of view of what nations and alliances are thinking, but it does come back to what certain individuals are driving at, and it makes perfect sense that those certain individuals will be bringing their own experiences to bear.
But also those people were elected by people who've got their own pain. And what Swamiji says is every country's got its own pain patterns.
Yes.
So, a country of tens of millions of people will produce a leader who reflects their pain patterns. And then they'll go off and attack somebody else. So we need to get rid of that pain.
And that brings us back to Jung and the collective, and how you can have whole groups of people with certain psychological profiles that are aligned,
and they get together.
Yeah. So I could keep talking to you all day. This has been a fascinating conversation.
Well, I've really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. So, John Banahasta, thank you very much for coming on the Whole Leader podcast and spending some time with us today. I'm sure our listeners will have found that fascinating and given them lots of things to reflect on. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Whole Leader podcast. I hope today's conversation gave you something to reflect on, whether in how you lead, how you create, or how you show up. If you found this valuable, feel free to share it and subscribe for more episodes. And if you'd like to keep the dialogue going, you'll find more at richards.blog or connect with me on LinkedIn. Until next time, stay present, stay curious, and keep leading from the whole of who you are.